Hey guys! Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your entire job revolves around swinging an axe in front of a crowd that is ready to riot at the first sign of a mistake. You're the medieval executioner, and your workspace is a wooden platform covered in yesterday's splinters, and enough grime to make a gym locker room smell like a spa. Your tools weigh more than your grocery shopping, your neighbours cross the street when they see you coming, and you haven't had a proper night's sleep in weeks because the local dogs won't stop barking at the gallows outside your window. If you think your commute is bad, try dragging a cart full of heavy equipment through ankle-deep mud while the entire town pretends you're invisible. This job comes with 0 workplace benefits, a truly terrible reputation, and a smell that clings to your clothes like you've been rolling around in a stable. If you're enjoying this already, please hit that like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. I'm genuinely curious to know where you're all watching from, so leave me a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. So let's step into the world of a medieval executioner and find out exactly why you wouldn't last a single week. Your official title sounds impressive until you realise it comes with absolutely no respect whatsoever. You're technically a civic employee, which means the local authorities hired you to carry out sentences, but nobody wants to admit they know you. When you walk through the market square, stall holders suddenly become very interested in rearranging their turnips. The baker who sold you bread yesterday now pretends he's never seen you before in his life. Even the rats seem to give you a wider berth than usual, which is saying something considering medieval rats fear absolutely nothing. You're like that colleague everyone avoids in the break room, except your break room is a public square and everyone in town is your colleague. The money situation is genuinely bizarre. You're paid per execution, which means your income fluctuates wildly depending on how enthusiastic the local judge is feeling that month. Some weeks you're doing relatively well, and other weeks you're wondering if you can afford another loaf of bread, or if you'll be eating the same grey porridge you've been choking down since Tuesday. There's no such thing as a salary, no monthly paycheck, and definitely no pension plan. You get a fee for each job, and sometimes the family of the condemned is expected to pay you directly, which creates the most awkward financial transactions imaginable. Imagine having to knock on someone's door and explain that you need payment for a service they definitely didn't want you to perform. It's like being a freelancer, except every single client meeting is absolutely horrible. Your reputation makes dating utterly impossible. Anyone you fancy immediately finds a reason to be somewhere else the moment they learn what you do for a living. You can't exactly lie about your profession either, because everyone in a medieval town knows everyone else's business. There's no swiping left or right, no online profiles where you can carefully curate your image. You're the executioner, and that information spreads faster than mold on forgotten cheese. Even if you tried to keep it quiet, someone would spot you dragging your equipment through town, and that would be the end of that. Romantic prospects dry up faster than a puddle in summer, and you spend most evenings alone with nothing but your thoughts and the persistent itch of flea bites for company. The uniform situation is practically non-existent. Nobody's providing you with special clothing or protective gear. You wear whatever you can afford, which usually means the same leather jerkin you've owned for 3 years and a pair of boots that stopped being waterproof sometime during the previous winter. When you're working, you might throw on a hood or mask, not because it's required, but because it marginally reduces the chance of someone recognizing you in the street and throwing something unpleasant in your direction. The mask itself is stuffy and makes breathing feel like you're inhaling through a damp sock. It's hot, it's uncomfortable, and it smells like every other time you've worn it, because washing it never quite gets rid of that peculiar musty quality. Your housing situation reflects your social standing perfectly. You're not living in the nice part of town with the merchants and guild members. You're stuck on the outskirts, probably near the tannery or the town dump, in a dwelling that's generous to call a cottage. The walls are thin enough that you can hear your neighbours' conversations and their frankly impressive snoring. The roof leaks in at least 4 places, and you've given up trying to catch all the drips with buckets. When it rains, you just accept that certain parts of your floor are going to be wet and plan your furniture arrangement accordingly. The whole place has a permanent dampness that makes everything feel slightly clammy to the touch, and there's a draft that comes through the doorframe no matter how much straw you stuff into the gaps. The smell of your profession follows you everywhere. It's not just one smell, but a combination that seems to seep into your skin and clothes, no matter how much you scrub. There's the mustiness of old wood, the tang of metal, the earthiness of the platform where you work, and dozens of other notes that combine into something truly special. You become nose blind to it after a while, but other people definitely aren't. You can tell by the way they wrinkle their noses when you're within 10 feet of them. It's the kind of pong that announces your arrival before you've even rounded the corner, and no amount of washing makes it go away completely. The soap you can afford barely makes a dent, and you've long since given up trying to smell like anything other than your profession. Storage of your equipment creates its own problems. You can't exactly leave your tools lying around in the open, because that would be disturbing for anyone who happens to visit. Not that many people visit. You need a dedicated space, probably a shed or a corner of your dwelling that you've curtained off, and even then you're constantly aware of what's sitting there. The tools themselves require maintenance. Metal needs oiling to prevent rust, wooden handles need checking for splinters and cracks, and everything needs to be kept in working order, because the last thing you need is equipment failure during a public event. It's like maintaining a car, except your car is a collection of medieval implements, and there's no manual or garage to help you out. The paperwork is surprisingly tedious. You'd think a medieval job would be straightforward, but there are records to keep, permissions to obtain, and a whole bureaucratic process around every execution. The local clerk needs documentation, the authorities need confirmation, and someone has to keep track of who's been sentenced and when. You're not doing all the writing yourself because you're probably not extensively educated, but you're involved in the process, answering questions and confirming details. It's medieval admin work, and it's just as tedious as any modern office job, except you're doing it in a drafty hall that smells like old parchment and tallow candles. Your schedule is completely unpredictable. Executions don't happen on a neat timetable. You might go weeks without work, then suddenly have 3 jobs scheduled in 1 week. There's no advance notice system, no calendar app to keep you organized. Someone sends a message, usually delivered by a very uncomfortable messenger who doesn't want to talk to you any more than necessary, and you're expected to be ready. This means you can't really plan anything. You can't commit to helping your neighbour repair his fence, or agree to travel to the next town for a market day, because you might get called to work at any moment. Your entire life exists in a state of perpetual standby, waiting for the next job to come through. Training for this position happens entirely on the job, because there's no executioner academy or training program. You learned by watching someone else do it, probably the previous executioner, who either retired, left town, or met an unfortunate end themselves. This means your education consisted of standing around looking nervous while someone demonstrated technique and explained the finer points of the trade. There's no textbook, no step-by-step guide, and definitely no practice runs. Your first real job is your first real job, and everyone's watching. The pressure is extraordinary, like taking your driving test, except the entire town has gathered to watch and judge your performance. The physical fitness requirements are no joke. Your primary tool is heavy, requiring significant upper body strength to wield effectively. You're not swinging it once or twice during a pleasant afternoon workout. You need to be able to lift it, position it accurately, and bring it down with enough force to do the job properly, all while standing on a platform in front of hundreds of people. There's no gym membership to help you prepare, no personal trainer designing a strength program. You build the necessary muscle through the work itself and whatever other physical labor you do to supplement your income. Your shoulders ache constantly, your back develops interesting new ways to hurt, and you discover muscles you didn't know existed. Sleep becomes a precious commodity you rarely enjoy in useful quantities. The night before a scheduled execution, you're awake worrying about 1,000 different things. What if the platform is slippery? What if the crowd gets rowdy? What if your equipment isn't properly maintained? What if you trip? The anxiety is relentless, churning through your mind like butter that refuses to form properly. When you finally do fall asleep, you wake up every hour or so, convinced you've overslept or forgotten something crucial. There's no alarm clock, just your own internal panic, and possibly a rooster that crows at irregular intervals. You arrive at work exhausted before you've even started, eyes gritty and head fuzzy from lack of rest. Your social calendar is impressively empty. There are no invitations to weddings, no requests to stand as a witness for important occasions, and definitely no one asking you to join their guild or social club. You're professionally toxic, and that status extends to every aspect of your life. The tavern goes quiet when you walk in, not because you're intimidating, but because no one wants to be seen socializing with you. Conversations end abruptly, people remember urgent appointments elsewhere, and you end up drinking alone in a corner while everyone else clusters on the opposite side of the room. It's like being perpetually uninvited to every party, except there are no parties, and everyone wishes you'd move to a different town. Meals are an exercise in making do with whatever you can afford on your irregular income. When work is steady, you might manage some meat, probably something questionable from the cheaper end of the market that's been sitting out slightly too long. When work is scarce, you're eating pottage, which is a fancy word for boiled grains and whatever vegetables haven't rotted yet. The taste is about as exciting as it sounds, like eating slightly flavoured water that's been thickened with things you'd rather not examine too closely. There's no variety, no spices, unless you count the occasional bit of herbs someone threw in to mask the blandness. You eat because you need fuel, not because there's any enjoyment involved. The weather makes every aspect of your job significantly worse. Medieval outdoor work means you're exposed to every element with minimal protection. When it's raining, the platform becomes slippery and treacherous. When it's hot, you're sweating through your clothes within minutes, and the crowd reeks like a barn full of animals that haven't been washed since last spring. When it's cold, your fingers go numb, which is absolutely not helpful when you need grip strength and precision. There's no rescheduling for weather. The execution happens on the appointed day regardless of whether it's sleeting, scorching, or so windy that your hood keeps blowing into your face. You just endure it and hope you don't lose your footing. Equipment maintenance occupies hours of your limited free time. Metal rusts if you don't oil it regularly, and rust affects performance in ways that make your job significantly harder. You're constantly cleaning, checking, and maintaining your tools with the kind of attention that people usually reserve for prize horses or valuable jewelry. Except your tools aren't beautiful or valuable to anyone but you. They're just necessary. Sharpening requires skill and patience, working the whetstone along the edge in steady strokes until you achieve the right angle. It's meditative in a deeply unpleasant way, knowing exactly what you're preparing for. Your hands develop calluses from the work, rough patches that catch on fabric and make simple tasks like eating slightly more awkward. The political situation around your job is complicated in ways you never anticipated. Different factions within the town have different opinions about justice, punishment, and how things should be done. You're caught in the middle of these debates without any power or say in the matter. You don't decide who gets sentenced or what the punishment should be. You're just the person who carries out orders, but somehow you become a focus for everyone's opinions anyway. People who think the authorities are too harsh blame you for being too enthusiastic. People who think the authorities are too lenient blame you for not being intimidating enough. You literally cannot win, and you've stopped trying to please anyone except the officials who actually pay you. Market day becomes an exercise in social awkwardness. You need to buy food and supplies like everyone else, but the experience is nothing like a normal shopping trip. Vendors serve you last, even if you arrived first. They handle your coins like they might be contaminated, dropping them into their pouches without touching your hand. Other shoppers leave a conspicuous gap around you, creating a bubble of personal space that would be luxurious if it weren't so obviously deliberate. You learn to shop quickly and efficiently, getting what you need and leaving before the atmosphere becomes even more uncomfortable. There's no browsing, no pleasant conversations about the weather or the quality of the turnips. Just transactions completed in minimal time with minimal interaction. Your hands never quite feel clean. You scrub them in the basin every evening, working the rough soap between your fingers and under your nails. But there's always a lingering sense that they're not quite right. The skin gets dried out from all the washing, developing cracks around the knuckles that sting when you flex your fingers. You try rubbing in some animal fat to moisturize, which helps with the cracking, but adds a slightly rancid smell that mingles with everything else. It's a losing battle, and eventually you accept that your hands are just going to look and feel like they belong to someone who works with medieval equipment for a living. The calluses multiply, creating rough patches that catch on fabric and make even simple tasks, like breaking bread, slightly more noticeable. The local children scatter when they see you coming, which should be a relief, but actually makes you feel rather isolated. Their parents have told them stories about the executioner, probably exaggerated ones involving monsters and nightmares, and now you're a walking cautionary tale. Even the town dogs seem wary of you, which is impressive considering medieval dogs aren't known for their discernment. They bark from a distance rather than approaching for scraps or attention. You become used to moving through town in a bubble of avoidance, like you're surrounded by an invisible fence that keeps everyone at arm's length. It's lonely in a way that's hard to explain, being constantly surrounded by people who are all actively ignoring your existence. The timber for the platform requires regular inspection and occasional replacement. Wood splits, warps, and weakens over time, especially when it's exposed to weather and heavy use. You're responsible for checking the boards, identifying problems, and arranging repairs, which means dealing with the local carpenter. This creates another awkward professional relationship, because the carpenter doesn't particularly want to be associated with you either, but he needs the work. Transactions happen quickly and quietly, usually at his workshop rather than at your site, and he definitely doesn't advertise that you're a customer. The wood itself is heavy and full of splinters, waiting to embed themselves in your palms whenever you need to move or adjust anything. Your teeth are becoming a genuine problem, like most people in this era, but you can't exactly take a day off for dental issues. One of your back molars has developed a persistent ache that flares up whenever you eat anything that requires serious chewing. You've learned to chew on the other side of your mouth, which works until something unexpectedly crunchy hits the wrong spot and sends a jolt of pain through your jaw. There's no dentist to visit, no painkillers beyond maybe chewing some willow bark that tastes absolutely foul and provides minimal relief. You just endure it, adding tooth pain to the growing list of physical discomforts that characterize your daily existence. Sometimes your jaw clicks when you yawn, a strange popping sensation that makes you wonder if something's actually wrong, or if this is just another thing you have to live with now. The boots you own are fundamentally inadequate for the amount of walking and standing your job requires. The soles are wearing thin in places, letting in moisture whenever you step in a puddle, which is constantly because medieval streets are essentially mud rivers with occasional stones. Your feet are perpetually damp, creating conditions that encourage blisters and a persistent fungal situation between your toes that itches like mad, but only at times when scratching would be completely inappropriate. You've tried stuffing the boots with straw for extra cushioning and insulation, which helps slightly, but also makes them smell like a stable. There's no specialist footwear shop where you can get something properly fitted. You have these boots, and you'll have them until they literally fall apart, at which point you'll have to spend a significant portion of your savings on another pair. The Monday morning feeling is amplified tenfold when you have a job scheduled for early in the week. You wake up with that sinking sensation in your stomach, the knowledge that you have something difficult ahead, and there's no calling in sick. Your head pounds with tension, your shoulders are already tight before you've even gotten out of bed, and you spend the entire morning moving through a fog of anxiety. Breakfast sits heavy in your stomach, assuming you can force anything down at all. Many executioners probably just skip eating before work because the nausea is too intense. You walk to the site feeling like you're moving through honey, every step requiring conscious effort, while your mind races through everything that could potentially go wrong. The official documents related to your work are kept by the town clerk, but you're expected to remember details and confirm information when asked. This means you need to keep track mentally of dates, names, and sentences, which is challenging when you're not extensively educated, and your memory is already occupied with trying to remember where you left your spare jerkin and whether you fed yourself yesterday. Sometimes officials quiz you on details from previous jobs, testing your recollection or checking their own records. You stand there trying to pull information from your tired brain while they tap their fingers impatiently and look at you like you're deliberately being difficult. It's medieval pop quizzes, except the subject matter is your actual job, and failure might mean you're considered unreliable. The lack of any workplace safety standards means you're constantly at risk of injury from your own equipment. There are no guidelines about proper handling, no training on how to avoid accidents, and definitely no compensation if something goes wrong. You've nicked yourself more than once during maintenance, creating wounds that you have to treat yourself with whatever basic medical knowledge you've picked up over the years. Usually this means cleaning it with water, maybe pressing some cobwebs into it, because someone told you that helps stop the problem, and wrapping it with a strip of cloth that you'll rewash and reuse until it falls apart. The wound either heals or it doesn't, and you just have to hope it's the former, because infection in this era can turn serious very quickly. Your reputation extends to your family members, assuming you have any who'll still acknowledge the relationship. Being related to the executioner makes you suspicious by association in the eyes of medieval society. Your siblings probably moved away or changed their names. Any cousins you had suddenly don't remember the family connection when asked. If you're married, which is unlikely given the social stigma, your spouse faces the same isolation you do. Their friends disappear, market vendors treat them coldly, and they become just as socially invisible as you are. It's a lonely existence for everyone involved, and you carry the guilt of knowing that your profession has essentially ruined their social standing too. This adds another layer of weight to everything you do, knowing that your job choice affects more than just your own life. The washing situation for your work clothes is genuinely grim. You can't take them to the communal washing area because nobody wants their clothing cleaned in the same water as yours. This means you're doing laundry alone, hauling water from the well in buckets that leave your arms aching, heating it over your fire if you can spare the fuel, and scrubbing the garments against a washboard or rock until your knuckles are raw. The soap is harsh, and doesn't create satisfying suds like modern detergent. It's more of a grimy paste that you work into the fabric, while hoping it's actually doing something useful. After washing, you wring out the clothes by hand, which is an excellent forearm workout, but absolutely not how you want to spend your limited free time. Then you hang them to dry, which in the damp medieval climate can take days, leaving you with fewer clothing options and a dwelling that smells like wet wool. The ladder you use to access the platform is rickety in a way that suggests it's held together more by hope than by actual structural integrity. The rungs are uneven, some worn smooth from use, and others still rough with splinters. Every time you climb it carrying equipment, you're acutely aware that one wrong step could send you tumbling backwards onto the ground below. There's no safety harness, no handrail, just you and your questionable balance trying to navigate upward while holding things that are both heavy and awkward. Your leg muscles burn from the repeated climbing, especially your calves, which have to work over time to stabilize you on each narrow rung. You've developed a nervous habit of testing each step before putting your full weight on it, which makes the climb take longer, but seems marginally safer than just charging up confidently. The local priest avoids you with almost comedic determination. Whenever you cross paths near the church, he suddenly remembers an urgent prayer he needs to perform inside, or discovers a fascinating architectural detail on the building that requires his immediate attention. You're not technically excommunicated, but you're certainly not welcomed into the religious community with open arms. This is isolating in an era where the church is central to social life and community identity. You miss out on festivals, gatherings, and the general sense of belonging that comes from being part of the congregation. Instead, you hover on the edges of religious life, technically Christian but practically excluded, like someone who's on the email list but never gets invited to the actual meetings. Your sense of time becomes oddly distorted when you're not working regularly. Without a structured schedule or set hours, days blur together into an undifferentiated mass of waiting and small tasks. You might spend an entire morning sharpening equipment, break for a meal of something beige and unexciting, then putter around doing minor repairs until the light fades and it's time to sleep. There's no weekend, no clear division between work time and personal time, because your work happens irregularly, and your personal time is just the gaps in between. You lose track of what day it is, only remembering when the church bells mark Sunday services that you're not really welcome to attend. It's a strange, unmoored existence where time passes, but doesn't seem to accumulate into anything meaningful. The dust in your dwelling is persistent and somehow different from normal household dust. It's grittier, darker, and seems to resettle immediately after you sweep it up. You push it toward the door with a broom made of tied twigs, creating a small cloud that makes you cough and probably just redistributes the dust to different surfaces. The floor is packed earth in most places, maybe some rough planks in others, and it's constantly generating more dirt no matter what you do. You could sweep twice a day and still have visible dust by evening. Eventually you just accept that a certain level of grime is permanent and stop fighting it. Your standards for cleanliness adjust dramatically downward until you're only really bothered if something starts growing or moving on its own. The professional rivalry with executioners from neighbouring towns is surprisingly real. You're all competing for a limited pool of work, and sometimes authorities will bring in someone from elsewhere if they think you're not competent enough, or if they want a specialist for a particular job. This creates tension at the occasional regional gatherings, where executioners cross paths, usually at larger events or when multiple sentences need carrying out simultaneously. You eye each other like competitors at a particularly grim sporting event, assessing technique and trying to gauge whether the other person might take your work. There's little camaraderie because you're all essentially freelancers in a very niche market. Instead of networking and mutual support, you get awkward silences and subtle attempts to make yourself look more skilled. The noise of the crowd before an execution is overwhelming in a visceral way that never gets easier to handle. It's a roar of voices, laughter, shouting, and general chaos that washes over you like a physical force. People are eating snacks, arguing about the proceedings, placing bets on various aspects of the event, and generally treating the whole thing like a festival. The volume makes it hard to think clearly, and you're trying to focus on your work while hundreds of voices create a wall of sound around you. Some people are chanting, others are singing crude songs, and someone always has a crying baby that adds a piercing note to the general din. Your ears ring for hours afterward, and you sometimes wonder if you're developing permanent hearing damage from the repeated exposure to crowd noise. The professional isolation extends to not having anyone to complain to about work problems. Normal people grumble to their colleagues about difficult customers or annoying supervisors, or the broken equipment that nobody's fixed yet. You have none of that. There's no one who understands what your job actually involves. No sympathetic ear to listen when you've had a particularly stressful day. You can't talk to your neighbours because they don't want to hear about your profession. You can't discuss it at the tavern because everyone will immediately change the subject or leave. So you keep everything bottled up inside, processing your stress and anxiety alone because there's literally no other option. This internal pressure builds over time, creating a kind of mental heaviness that sits on your shoulders like a wet cloak. The contract situation is loose enough to be concerning. You don't have anything written down that protects your interests or guarantees payment. Everything operates on verbal agreements and local custom, which is fine when things go well but offers zero protection when disputes arise. If someone decides they don't want to pay you, your options are limited. You can't exactly take them to court because the same authorities who employ you are the ones who would judge the case, and they're not particularly motivated to side with the executioner over a respected merchant or guild member. You also can't refuse to work in protest, because then you definitely lose any future employment. You're stuck in a position of having to trust that people will honour their agreements, while knowing that your leverage is essentially non-existent. The breakfast situation on workdays is a delicate balance between eating enough to have energy and not eating so much that you feel sick from nerves. You usually force down some bread, probably stale enough to require dunking in water, or weak ale to soften it, and maybe some cheese if you've got any that hasn't developed interesting new colours. The food sits in your stomach like a stone while anxiety churns around it, creating a queasy sensation that makes you regret eating at all. But not eating means you'll be lightheaded and shaky by midday, which is even worse when you need steady hands and clear focus. So you compromise with small amounts of bland food that hopefully won't make a reappearance and try not to think too hard about the day ahead. Your firewood supply requires constant attention because you need fire for cooking, heating water, and taking the edge off the cold during winter nights. Gathering wood means walking to the forest edge and collecting fallen branches, or trading some of your limited income for logs that someone else has already cut. The wood needs to be dry enough to burn properly, which means storing it somewhere sheltered and waiting for green wood to season. Your dwelling probably has a small wood pile that never seems quite large enough, and you're always conscious of rationing your fuel so you don't run out at an inconvenient time. Starting a fire with flint and tinder is a skill that sounds romantic, but is actually tedious and frustrating, especially when your hands are cold and the tinder is slightly damp and nothing wants to catch properly. The paperwork from the clerk's office occasionally requires your mark or signature, which is embarrassing if you're not confident with writing. Many executioners are probably only basically literate, if that, having learned their trade through practical demonstration rather than formal education. So, you're faced with official documents covered in neat script while you're trying to make a mark or scratch out your name in letters that don't quite line up properly. The clerk watches with barely concealed impatience, possibly redoing your signature himself once you leave so the records look official. It's another small humiliation in a career full of them, a reminder that despite being necessary to the justice system, you're not actually respected as a professional. The seasonal festivals that everyone else enjoys are awkward affairs for you. During harvest celebrations or midsummer events, the town gathers for communal feasting and entertainment. You're not technically banned from attending, but your presence creates a dampness in the festivities, like a rain cloud at a picnic. Conversations pause when you approach. People shift away to make room that's not really welcoming space, and you end up standing on the periphery watching everyone else have fun. The food smells amazing, the music is lively, and the general atmosphere of celebration makes your isolation even more pronounced. Eventually you stop bothering to attend, staying home instead with some basic meal and the company of your own thoughts. It's less actively unpleasant than being visibly excluded, though also more lonely. The state of your bedding is frankly depressing. You've got a mattress stuffed with straw that's old enough to have compressed into lumpy, uncomfortable clumps. The straw should be changed regularly, but fresh straw costs money and effort to obtain, so you keep using the same stuff until it's more dust than plant matter. Your blanket is scratchy wool that's developed holes in several places and doesn't provide as much warmth as you'd like during cold nights. The pillow is a small sack of whatever soft material you could find, probably more old straw or maybe some rags, and it's about as comfortable as it sounds. You wake up with a stiff neck more often than not, adding to the general collection of aches that your body maintains. Washing the bedding is a major undertaking that you avoid until the smell becomes too noticeable even for you. The walking route to your work site takes you through parts of town where your presence is particularly unwelcome. You've learned the paths that minimize interaction, using back alleys and side streets even though they're muddier and less direct. Sometimes you have to pass through the market square anyway, and you walk quickly with your head down, carrying your equipment and trying to be as invisible as possible. People don't physically block your path, but they make their displeasure clear through body language and the occasional muttered comment. Kids might throw small stones or clods of dirt from a safe distance, not enough to really hurt, but enough to make the journey unpleasant. By the time you arrive at the platform, you're already tired and stressed before the actual work has even begun. Your relationship with the local blacksmith is crucial but strained. You need his services for equipment maintenance and repairs, but he treats you with the same wariness everyone else does. Transactions happen at his forge, where at least there's a legitimate business reason for your interaction. He's professional enough to do good work, because his reputation depends on the quality of his metalwork, but there's no friendly chat or casual conversation. He examines what you've brought, quotes a price, does the work, and sends you on your way with minimal interaction. The forge itself is hot and loud, filled with the clang of hammer on metal and the hiss of hot iron meeting water. You stand awkwardly to the side while he works, not quite sure where to look or what to do with your hands, counting the moments until you can leave. The anxiety dreams that plague your sleep are vivid and exhausting. You dream about equipment failure, about crowds rioting, about slipping on the platform, about 1,000 variations of things going wrong while everyone watches and judges. You wake up with your heart pounding and sweat cooling on your skin, despite the chill in the room, disoriented and needing a moment to remember that it was just a dream. Then you lie awake because going back to sleep means risking another nightmare, but staying awake means being tired the next day. It's a horrible cycle that leaves you perpetually exhausted, with dark circles under your eyes and a foggy quality to your thoughts that makes everything slightly harder than it should be. The price of lamp oil means you're often sitting in darkness once the sun sets, because you can't afford to burn light for leisure. Your evenings are short, dictated by natural light rather than by choice. When you do light a lamp, it's smoky and dim, creating more of a guttering glow than actual illumination. The smell of burning oil fills your dwelling, mixing with all the other smells to create a distinctive atmosphere that probably clings to your clothes and skin. You eat your evening meal in semi-darkness, clean up by feel as much as by sight, and go to bed early because there's nothing else to do and no light to do it by. Entertainment is non-existent. There are no books even if you could read fluently, no games unless you count moving rocks around, no screens or devices or any way to occupy your mind. Just darkness and silence and waiting for morning. The condition of your cooking pot is representative of your general domestic situation. It's dented, blackened from years of sitting in fire, and probably older than you are. The handle is wrapped with cloth because the metal gets too hot to touch directly, and there's a spot on the bottom that's worn thin enough to be concerning. You can't afford to replace it, so you just keep using it and hoping it doesn't develop a hole that would render it completely useless. Everything you cook tastes vaguely similar because it's all cooked in the same pot that never gets completely clean no matter how much you scrub it. There's a permanent residue baked onto the interior that adds a certain smoky, slightly burnt flavour to every meal. You've stopped noticing, but anyone else eating your cooking would definitely detect something off about the taste. The administrative building where you occasionally need to report is uncomfortable in a different way from the rest of town. It's where the officials work, and they treat you with a kind of cold professionalism that's somehow worse than open hostility. They need you, but they don't like needing you, and that tension fills every interaction. You stand in front of desks while clerks shuffle parchments and avoid eye contact, waiting to be acknowledged like a servant despite being technically employed by the same authorities. The building smells of ink and old documents, and there's always the scratch of quills writing as records are updated. Your boots leave muddy prints on the floor, which someone will have to clean later, adding to the sense that you're an inconvenience to everyone involved. The concept of a sick day doesn't exist in your profession. If you wake up feeling genuinely ill, with a fever or a stomach complaint that keeps you running to the latrine, you still have to work if there's a job scheduled. There's no calling in, no replacement who can cover for you, no understanding supervisor who tells you to rest and feel better. You simply have to push through whatever's ailing you and hope you don't collapse publicly. The physical demands of your work don't adjust for your condition. The equipment is still heavy, the platform is still there, and the crowd is still watching. You've probably worked through fevers that made your vision swim, through nausea that threatened to embarrass you publicly, through aches and pains that would send a modern person straight to bed. Your herb garden, if you have one, is a scraggly collection of plants that are supposed to help with various ailments. There's maybe some feverfew for headaches, some mint for digestion, possibly some lavender because someone told you it helps with sleep. The garden is more weeds than herbs, and you're never quite sure if you're harvesting the right plant, or something that just looks similar. Medieval plant identification is not your strong suit, and there's no reference guide or internet to check against. You chew bitter leaves and hope they're doing something beneficial, rather than slowly poisoning you. The taste is foul enough that you're convinced it must be medicinal, because nothing that unpleasant could be without some redeeming health property. The lack of privacy in a medieval town means everyone knows your business, even when you prefer they didn't. Your neighbours can hear through the thin walls when you're pacing at night, or when you knock something over. People notice when you leave your dwelling, and when you return. There are no curtains thick enough to completely block the view, no lock strong enough to keep out determined intruders. though who would want to burgle the executioner is an open question. You exist in a state of constant visibility, unable to hide or retreat completely from public awareness. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to articulate, never being able to truly relax because you're always potentially being observed and judged. The problem of vermin in your dwelling is constant and losing battle. Mice scurry across the floor at night, bold enough that they barely bother to hide anymore. You hear them scratching in the walls and rustling through whatever food stores you've tried to protect. Rats appear occasionally, larger and more confident, and you've given up being startled by them. They're just part of the household now, uninvited roommates who eat your supplies and leave droppings everywhere. Fleas are even worse, jumping from the rodents to you and creating itchy bites across your ankles and anywhere else they can reach. You scratch absent-mindedly while you work, leaving red marks that sometimes get infected if you scratch too vigorously with dirty fingernails. There's no effective pest control beyond maybe getting a cat, but cats require feeding, and you're barely managing to feed yourself. The change of seasons affects your work in ways office workers never consider. Summer brings heat that makes standing in the sun feel like being slowly cooked, with sweat running down your back and soaking into your clothing until everything clings uncomfortably. The crowd smells even worse in heat, a concentrated funk of unwashed humanity that makes breathing through your mouth seem preferable despite the taste of dust and general air pollution. Autumn brings rain that turns everything muddy and slippery, creating treacherous conditions underfoot. Winter is brutally cold, numbing your extremities and making your teeth chatter while you try to maintain the steady hands your work requires. Spring is marginally better, but brings mud from melting snow and unpredictable weather that swings between pleasant and miserable within the same day. Your reputation means that any conflict or dispute in town might somehow get connected to you, even when you had nothing to do with it. Someone's chickens go missing, and somehow people wonder if the executioner is involved, as if you're not only ending sentences but also running a criminal enterprise in your spare time. A suspicious fire breaks out, and there are murmurs about whether you had a grudge against the property owner. You become a convenient scapegoat for any misfortune, the town's resident villain who can be blamed when things go wrong. This adds a layer of paranoia to your existence, knowing that any accusation against you will be readily believed because of what you do for a living. You avoid anything that could be construed as suspicious and keep your head down even more than usual. The tools you use require a feel that only comes from experience, a muscle memory that develops over time. The weight, the balance, the angle of approach, all of these factors matter tremendously and can only be learned through doing. There's no practice dummy or training simulation. Every job is real, and you learn on the fly while trying not to make mistakes that will haunt your reputation. Your hands know the weight before your conscious mind processes it, adjusting grip and stance automatically. This physical knowledge is the only thing you can really rely on when nerves are fraying and the crowd is roaring. Your body goes through the motions because you've trained it to, taking over when your mind wants to panic or freeze. The morning routine before work involves a series of small rituals that probably count as superstition, but feel necessary anyway. You check your equipment in the same order every time, test certain movements, maybe touch a particular stone or beam for luck. These habits provide a fragile sense of control in a situation where you actually have very little. If you skip any step, you feel off balance for the rest of the day, convinced that you've invited bad fortune. It's silly, and you know it. But the alternative is walking into high-pressure situations with no psychological protection at all. So you maintain your rituals. finding comfort in the familiar sequence, even when the outcome remains uncertain. The human mind needs patterns to hold on to, and yours has constructed elaborate ones around the most stressful parts of your job. The quality of light in different seasons affects your work more than you'd expect. Summer mornings are bright and harsh, making you squint against the glare and wish you had some way to shade your eyes. Winter mornings are dim and grey, requiring you to work in conditions where visibility is marginal, and shadows make everything slightly harder to judge accurately. There are no adjustable lights, no ways to improve conditions. You work in whatever natural light is available and adapt as best you can. Your eyes strain constantly, and you probably have persistent headaches from squinting and concentrating in less than ideal conditions. By evening, your vision feels tired in a way that's hard to describe, a kind of visual exhaustion that makes you want to close your eyes and rest in darkness. The lack of any kind of employee support or mental health resources means you're processing significant stress and trauma entirely on your own. There's no counselor to talk to, no therapy session, no concept that your work might have psychological impacts that need addressing. You're just expected to get on with it, to be unaffected by the nature of your profession and the isolation it creates. So you bottle everything up, pushing emotions down and trying not to think too hard about what you do or how it affects you. This internal pressure builds over months and years, creating a kind of mental scar tissue that changes how you interact with the world. You become harder, more closed off, less able to connect even in the rare moments when connection might be possible. The marketplace offers occasional entertainment in the form of traveling performers or merchants with exotic goods, but you experience it all from the margins. You can't push forward to get a better view without clearing a space around you that makes everyone uncomfortable. You watch puppet shows from the back of the crowd, hear musicians from a distance, observe jugglers while standing off to the side. The excitement and joy that permeate festival days feel like they're happening to someone else, in a world adjacent to yours but not actually including you. You're a ghost at the feast, present but not participating, aware of what you're missing but unable to bridge the gap between yourself and the celebrating crowd. Your relationship with time passing is complicated by the lack of meaningful milestones. For most people, time is marked by seasons, festivals, births, marriages, and other social events that create a narrative of life progressing. Your time is marked by jobs, by the periods between work, by the slow degradation of your equipment and dwelling. There are no celebrations, no personal achievements, no growth or advancement in your career. You're an executioner now, and you'll be an executioner until you die, or become too old to continue. The future looks identical to the present, which looks very similar to the past. This lack of progress or change creates a kind of temporal flatness, where days accumulate, but don't seem to build toward anything meaningful. The communication system for scheduling work is frustratingly imprecise. Someone eventually shows up at your dwelling to inform you that your services are needed, but the timing is vague and subject to change. You're told to be ready at a certain time, which might mean early morning or might mean sometime before noon, and you're expected to figure it out. There's no written schedule, no confirmation message, just verbal instructions passed through intermediaries who don't want to linger in your presence. You end up arriving early and waiting around because being late would be worse, losing hours of your day to standing around near the platform trying to look professional while having nothing to do. The inefficiency is maddening, but there's no system to improve it. The texture of your clothing, after months of wear, becomes rough and unpleasant against skin. Wool doesn't soften with age in the way modern fabrics do. Instead, it gets more matted and scratchy, with fibres poking out at odd angles. Your undergarments, assuming you have any beyond your main clothing layers, are probably made of rough linen that chafes in sensitive areas and leaves you constantly aware of your clothing in an uncomfortable way. Seams dig into your shoulders and waist, creating pressure points that ache by day's end. The collar rubs against your neck, leaving it red and irritated. You dream sometimes of soft fabrics, of clothing that doesn't constantly remind you of its presence through discomfort. But that's not the reality of medieval working-class garments. The transition between seasons is hard on your body as temperatures swing, and your clothing options don't really adjust accordingly. You don't have a wardrobe with seasonal selections. You have what you're wearing, maybe one backup outfit, and that's it. So you're either too hot or too cold most of the time, sweating through summer in wool or shivering through winter in inadequate layers. The temperature regulation that modern people take for granted through heating, air conditioning, and appropriate clothing simply doesn't exist. Your body is constantly fighting to maintain comfortable temperature, burning energy to warm up or cool down, leaving you tired from the effort even before considering the physical demands of your actual work. The concept of retirement is laughable in your profession. There's no pension plan, no savings account that will support you in old age, no social security system. You work until you physically can't anymore, and then you hope you've managed to save enough to survive on, which you probably haven't. The future is a looming question mark that gets more concerning as you age and notice your body becoming less capable. Your shoulders don't have the same strength, your back complains more loudly, your hands aren't as steady. Eventually you'll be unable to continue. And then what? You'll be an elderly former executioner, which is possibly an even worse social position than being a current one, with no income and no prospects. This gnawing worry about the future adds to present stress, creating a feedback loop of anxiety. The rare moments of peace in your life are precious and fleeting. Maybe it's a quiet morning when no one's around, and you can sit outside your dwelling without feeling watched. Maybe it's an evening when the aches aren't too bad and you can eat a decent meal without your stomach protesting. These moments are so infrequent that you notice them specially, conscious that this is as good as things get, and trying to appreciate it before the usual weight of your existence returns. You don't have enough of these moments to balance out the difficult ones, but they're enough to keep you going. Small pockets of not terrible that punctuate the general grind of your daily life. The weight of public attention during work is physically oppressive in a way that's hard to convey. Hundreds of eyes focused on you create an almost tangible pressure that makes your skin prickle and your movements feel wooden. You're hyper-aware of every gesture, every step, knowing that any mistake or hesitation will be noticed and commented on. The crowd isn't silent either. They're shouting, calling out, providing running commentary like you're some kind of sporting event. Their expectations weigh on you alongside the literal weight of your equipment, creating a double burden that makes everything more exhausting. You can feel their judgment, their scrutiny, their mix of fascination and revulsion, and it never gets easier to ignore. The post-work period involves returning your equipment to storage and trying to decompress from the stress and adrenaline of the event. Your hands shake as you clean and put things away, the tension finally releasing now that you're not being watched. Sometimes you feel nauseous, the anxiety catching up with you once the immediate crisis has passed. You sit in your dwelling staring at nothing, too wound up to be useful, but too drained to actually do anything productive. The silence after the crowd noise is almost ringing in its quality, your ears still adjusted for chaos and struggling with the absence of sound. Eventually you make yourself eat something, though food has no appeal, because you need fuel, and skipping meals only makes everything worse. The interactions with officials after an event are brief and awkward. They want to confirm that everything went according to plan, get your report on any issues, and process your payment. These conversations happen quickly in corners of official buildings, everyone wanting to conclude the business as efficiently as possible. The money you receive, assuming it's prompt, goes immediately into your mental accounting of bills and necessities. There's no moment of satisfaction or accomplishment, just the mechanical exchange of service for coin, and the knowledge that you'll need to do this again eventually. The officials dismiss you without ceremony, already moving on to other business, and you leave feeling like a tradesman who's just completed an unsavory but necessary repair job. The bruises from equipment handling accumulate over time in curious places. Your shoulders carry marks from where straps or handles pressed during transport. Your shins have mysterious dark spots from bumping into things while maneuvering in cramped spaces. Your fingers develop small bruises under the nails from pinch points and pressure. None of these injuries are serious, but they're constant, a rolling collection of minor damage that your body maintains perpetually. You're never fully healed because new small injuries appear faster than old ones fade. It gives you a battered quality, like someone who's always in the process of recovering from something, even though there's been no single major incident. The cumulative effect is a body that always hurts a little, everywhere, all the time. The question of legacy, or what you'll leave behind, is depressing to contemplate. Most people hope to be remembered fondly, to have their life mean something to those who come after. Your legacy is being that executioner who worked in this town during this period. You're not building anything that will last, not creating art or contributing to the community in ways they'll appreciate. You're a functional necessity that people want to forget about as quickly as possible. There will be no memorial, no fond remembrances, no children or grandchildren telling stories about you. You'll be a line in a record book, a footnote in the town's history, notable only for your profession, and quickly passed over because nobody wants to dwell on such grim details. The seasonal allergies or respiratory issues that come from working in dusty, smoky conditions are another persistent annoyance. Your lungs feel permanently coated in something, leading to a chronic slight cough that never really goes away. You clear your throat constantly, hawking and spitting to try to dislodge whatever's making breathing feel slightly laboured. The air quality in medieval towns is terrible anyway, with smoke from cooking fires and workshops, dust from streets and construction, and various other particulates floating around constantly. Your occupation adds its own special contributions to the mix, and your respiratory system is staging a permanent protest against the conditions it's forced to work in. You wake up with a scratchy throat and go to bed with lungs that feel tired, and the cycle repeats endlessly. The social dynamics of the tavern, on the rare occasions you enter, are fascinating in a painful way. You're not technically banned, but your presence changes the atmosphere immediately. Conversations drop to murmurs, laughter becomes subdued, and people shift their positions to maintain distance. The tavern keeper serves you because refusing service would be problematic, but there's no friendliness in the transaction. You receive your drink and are expected to consume it quickly and leave. There's no lingering, no social enjoyment, just the mechanical consumption of ale that tastes no better or worse than what anyone else is drinking. You notice other patrons relaxing once you've left, the normal atmosphere returning like sunlight after a cloud passes. Being that cloud, the dampener of other people's good times, adds another layer to your isolation. The physical maintenance of your dwelling falls entirely on you, with no help or support. When the door starts hanging wrong on its leather hinges, You have to figure out how to fix it. When a section of wall starts crumbling, you need to patch it with whatever materials you can scavenge or afford. When the roof leaks worsen, you climb up there yourself with some spare thatch and hope you don't fall off while making repairs. None of these tasks are your expertise, and the results show it. Your dwelling is a patchwork of amateur repairs, that kind of work, but don't really solve problems permanently. Everything has a temporary makeshift quality, and you're constantly playing maintenance catch-up with a structure that's slowly losing its battle against time and weather. The dreams you have about different lives, about being someone else doing something else, are both a comfort and a torture. In sleep, you sometimes imagine being a baker or a carpenter, having a normal profession where people smile when they see you coming. You dream of having friends, a family, social standing that isn't rock bottom. Then you wake up in your damp dwelling to another day of being the executioner, and the contrast makes reality even harder to bear. These dreams stick with you through the morning, ghostly impressions of other lives you'll never live, making you more conscious of what you've lost or never had. Eventually you learn to suppress even your dreams, trying not to want things that are impossible, accepting your reality because imagining alternatives is too painful. The accounting of your possessions could be done quickly because you own so little. Your clothing, your equipment, some basic household items, and that's essentially it. There are no valuables, no treasures, no accumulation of nice things that mark a life well lived. Everything you own is functional and worn, kept because it's necessary, rather than because you have any attachment to it. If you died tomorrow, your possessions could be inventoried in minutes and would likely be thrown away rather than passed on, because nobody wants items that belong to the executioner. This material poverty reflects your social poverty, the complete lack of richness in any dimension of your life. You exist at subsistence level in terms of both physical resources and human connection, getting by but never thriving. The mornings when frost covers everything add a new dimension of misery to your routine. Your fingers go numb almost immediately when you step outside, making even simple tasks like drawing water from the well an exercise in fumbling incompetence. The metal parts of your equipment are painfully cold to touch, feeling like they're burning even though they're frozen. Your breath comes out in clouds that obscure your vision momentarily with each exhale. The platform itself becomes treacherous with ice, requiring you to spread ashes or sand across the surface to create some traction. Nobody considers postponing work for weather, so you're expected to function normally in conditions that make everything twice as difficult and dangerous. Your nose runs constantly, and wiping it with your sleeve just spreads cold moisture across your face. The grinding monotony of meals is soul-crushing in ways that hunger wouldn't be. At least hunger has variation, the crescendo of need followed by the relief of eating. But eating the same grey pottage day after day, week after week, creates a flatness that mirrors the rest of your existence. You shovel food into your mouth mechanically, barely tasting it because there's nothing to taste. Sometimes you find yourself chewing and realize you don't remember starting to eat, your body going through the motions while your mind wanders elsewhere. The lack of variety isn't just boring, it's psychologically deadening, removing one of the few potential pleasures from your daily life. Food is fuel and nothing more, and even that fuel is of questionable quality. The dogs that roam the town streets have complicated opinions about you. Some avoid you like everyone else does, slinking away when you approach. Others seem drawn to the smell of your work, following at a distance with their noses working overtime. You can't pet them or befriend them because their owners would be furious, and feeding them would waste resources you can barely spare for yourself. So you exist in this strange liminal space, with the town's animal population, noticed by them but unable to interact in any meaningful way. Sometimes you wish you could have a dog of your own, a companion who wouldn't judge your profession, but feeding yourself is challenge enough without adding another mouth to consider. The state of your fingernails reflects the general griminess of your existence. There's always dirt under them, dark crescents that no amount of scraping with a stick or washing seems to fully remove. The nails themselves are ragged from breaking rather than being properly trimmed, and you have hangnails that catch on fabric and hurt when you flex your fingers. Your hands are the hands of someone who does physical labor without the benefit of gloves or proper tools for maintenance. They're prematurely aged, rough and scarred, with knuckles that are perpetually swollen from minor injuries and inflammation. When you look at them, you're looking at a record of your life written in calluses and damage. The theological questions about your profession occasionally surface in your mind during sleepless nights. You're carrying out sentences ordered by legitimate authorities, so technically you're part of the justice system rather than committing moral wrongs. But the church's position is ambiguous, and you're definitely contaminated in the eyes of religious society. You wonder sometimes if you're damned, if what you do for survival has cost you any hope of salvation. These thoughts spiral in the darkness, creating anxiety that has no resolution because there's no one you can ask, and no answer that would satisfy anyway. You push them down and try not to think about the afterlife, because the present life is hard enough without adding eternal concerns. The changes in your body composition over time are noticeable when you catch glimpses of yourself in reflective surfaces. You're leaner than you used to be, not in a healthy athletic way, but in a worn-down, insufficient nutrition way. Your face has become more angular, with hollows under your cheekbones that weren't there before. Your ribs are more prominent when you wash, a visible reminder that you're not getting enough food to maintain optimal weight. The physical demands of your work burn through calories that your diet doesn't adequately replace, creating a slow drain on your body's reserves. You're not starving in the acute sense, but you're chronically underfed, and it shows in the gradual whittling away of any excess flesh. The protocol around your work is oddly formal, considering how much everyone wants to avoid thinking about it. There are specific words that must be said, specific positions people must stand in, a whole choreography to the event that serves some ceremonial purpose you don't fully understand. You have to follow these forms precisely because deviation would be noted and criticized. So you memorize the sequences, practice the movements, ensure that you're performing the ritual aspects correctly alongside the practical ones. It adds another layer of stress because it's not enough to be physically capable. You also need to remember arbitrary rules about positioning and timing that vary slightly by region and situation. The market pricing that you encounter seems subtly inflated when you're the customer. Vendors quote numbers that feel higher than what you've heard them offer others, and you have no recourse because haggling would require a social interaction they want to minimize. You pay what they ask because refusing means not getting what you need, and they know you know this. It's a small tax on being the executioner, an extra penalty extracted by merchants who dislike you but like your coins well enough. Over time, these inflated prices add up, making your already precarious financial situation even more unstable. You're paying a premium for basic goods simply because of what you do, and there's no appeals process or alternative market you can access. The skills you've developed in this profession are completely non-transferable to any other work. You can't list them on some medieval resume and expect another employer to be impressed. Your expertise is narrow and stigmatized, useful only for the one job that nobody else wants to do. If you tried to change careers, you'd be starting from nothing, except worse than nothing, because you'd be starting with a reputation of having been an executioner. The specialized knowledge you've accumulated has trapped you, rather than creating opportunities, making you more suited for this role and less suited for any other with each passing month. It's a form of professional quicksand where struggling only seems to sink you deeper. The birthday celebrations that happen for other people pass unnoticed for you. You probably don't even know your exact birth date, because record keeping for common people is minimal, and your family situation is murky at best. There's no one to remember or mark the occasion, no gifts or special meals or acknowledgement that you've survived another year. Time passes in an undifferentiated flow, where one day is much like another, and the anniversary of your birth carries no more significance than any other date. This absence of personal milestones contributes to the feeling that you're not really living so much as existing, going through motions without progress or meaning. Other people have lives with chapters and events. You have a long, grey continuation that will eventually stop. The sensation of hunger in the last few days before payment arrives is familiar enough to have become routine. Your stomach makes audible protests, gurgling complaints that you try to ignore. The lightheadedness that comes from insufficient food makes everything slightly unreal, like you're moving through water or observing your life from a small distance. You ration what little remains in your stores, eating amounts that barely qualify as meals and telling yourself it's enough. The constant awareness of emptiness becomes background noise, something you function around rather than something that stops you from working. People in better circumstances might call this suffering, but for you, it's just another aspect of the irregular feast or famine cycle your profession creates. The bucket you use for washing has a crack that leaks slowly, forcing you to work quickly before all the water drains out. You keep meaning to get it repaired or replaced, but other expenses always take priority, and you've become skilled at working around the leak. It's emblematic of your entire life, making do with broken things because functional things are luxuries you can't afford. The bucket sits in the corner, dripping occasionally onto the floor, creating a damp spot that never dries, and probably contributing to the general moldiness of your dwelling. You've stopped seeing it as a problem requiring solution, and started seeing it as just another feature of your environment, like the drafts or the smell or the rodents. The memory of comfort is fading in ways that are almost merciful. You can barely remember what it felt like to be warm enough, fed enough, rested enough. Your baseline has shifted so thoroughly that your current state of chronic discomfort feels normal. When you do experience something pleasant, like unexpectedly good weather, or a meal with actual flavour, it almost doesn't register because your capacity for enjoyment has atrophied. You're adapting to deprivation by forgetting there was ever anything else, which makes day-to-day survival easier, but also means you're losing parts of yourself that recognized when things were wrong. The person you were before this job would pity the person you've become, but you can't quite access that perspective anymore. The interactions with the town guard are professionally necessary, but socially awkward. They need to coordinate with you for scheduling and logistics, but they don't want to be seen as friendly with the executioner. Conversations happen in terse exchanges, where they deliver information and leave as quickly as possible. They never meet your eyes for long, addressing a point somewhere past your shoulder, instead of engaging with you directly. You understand the dynamic. You make them uncomfortable by reminding them of the grimmer aspects of justice and order. But understanding doesn't make it less isolating. Even people whose jobs overlap with yours maintain maximum distance, treating you like a tool they must occasionally use, rather than a colleague working towards similar ends. The ache in your lower back has become a constant companion, worsening throughout the day and settling into a deep throb by evening. You've developed a habit of pressing your fists into the painful spots, trying to knead out tension that never fully releases. The physical demands of your work, combined with poor nutrition and inadequate rest, create perfect conditions for chronic pain. There's no treatment beyond enduring it, no medicine that would help even if you could afford it. You move more carefully than you used to, protecting your back instinctively, which probably makes you look older than your years. The pain colours everything, shortening your temper and your patience, adding one more layer of difficulty to an already challenging existence. The concept of hope for future improvement has quietly disappeared from your mental landscape. You no longer tell yourself things will get better, because experience has thoroughly taught you otherwise. This isn't active despair so much as realistic assessment. Your circumstances are what they are, determined by social forces far beyond your control, and imagining change is just setting yourself up for disappointment. You've settled into a kind of grey acceptance, getting through each day without expecting anything more than survival. Some might call this depression, and they'd probably be right. But medieval society has no framework for mental health care, and you certainly don't have access to help even if it existed. You just continue, because the alternative is giving up entirely, and something stubborn in you refuses to do that. The washing of your hair is an infrequent event, because it requires significant effort and resources. You need enough water, which must be hauled and possibly heated. You need soap, which is expensive and harsh. You need time when you're not too exhausted to bother. So your hair becomes greasy and lank, probably home to various small creatures that you try not to think about too hard. When you do finally wash it, the process is uncomfortable, the soap stinging your scalp, and the cold rinse water making you gasp. Your hair never feels truly clean, just less dirty than it was, and the improvement is temporary. Within days, the greasiness returns and you're back where you started. Personal grooming falls low on the priority list when you're focused on survival, and it shows in your increasingly unkempt appearance. The silence of your dwelling at night is oppressive in its completeness. There's no ambient noise of household members, no murmur of conversation or companionable presence, just you and the sounds of the structure settling and the scurrying of vermin in the walls. The silence amplifies your thoughts, leaving nothing to distract from the circular worries and regrets that plague your idle moments. You sometimes talk to yourself just to hear a voice, conducting one-sided conversations that would probably seem mad to any observer. The lack of human connection extends to the lack of human sound, and the quiet becomes another form of isolation that presses down on you in the darkness. The efficiency with which you've learned to perform basic tasks is born from grim necessity rather than pride in skill. You can start a fire with minimal materials, prepare a meal from almost nothing, and repair clothing with crude but functional stitches. These abilities keep you alive, but bring no satisfaction, because they're just proof of how completely you're on your own. There's no one to admire your resourcefulness or acknowledge your competence at surviving difficult circumstances. The skills accumulate without recognition, making you more capable of enduring hardship without making the hardship any less hard. You're becoming an expert at subsistence, which is possibly the most depressing expertise to develop. The way children react to you is particularly painful, despite instructions to exclude them from this narration. The reaction of anyone younger is immediate avoidance, and their guardians pull them away quickly when you're spotted. You see families cluster together, parents placing themselves between you and their offspring, as if your mere presence poses a threat. This instinctive protection against you reinforces your status as someone dangerous and unwelcome. The future generation is being taught to fear and avoid you before they even understand what you do, ensuring that your isolation will continue regardless of how long you remain in this profession. The cycle perpetuates itself, and you're powerless to break it or even slow it down. The concept of fresh clothing is laughable when you own essentially two outfits, and both are in constant rotation. You wash one while wearing the other, which means you're always either wearing dirty clothes or wearing slightly damp clothes that haven't fully dried yet. The damp clothes feel clammy against your skin and smell musty, while the dirty clothes have reached a level of grime where they could probably stand up on their own if you let them. Neither option is pleasant, and you alternate between two forms of discomfort without ever experiencing the simple pleasure of clean, dry, fresh clothing. The fabric is stiff with accumulated sweat and dirt, creating friction points that chafe against your skin and leave red marks where seams dig in. The marketplace gossip that you overhear in fragments is often about you, discussed by people who don't realize you're within earshot or don't care if you hear. They speculate about your life, your character, your supposed habits, with the confidence of people who know nothing but feel entitled to opinions anyway. Their theories are wildly wrong, but you can't correct them without making the situation more awkward. So you listen to strangers describe a fictional version of you, attributing motivations and behaviors that have no connection to reality, and you just keep walking. This second-hand understanding of how you're perceived is both enlightening and depressing, revealing exactly how little anyone actually knows about you, despite your visible presence in the community. The coordination required for your work is something you've developed through necessity rather than natural talent. Your hands and eyes must work together with precision under pressure, and any shake or hesitation can create serious problems. You've trained yourself through repetition to move smoothly and deliberately, suppressing any tremor that might come from nerves or fatigue. This physical control extends to your posture and expression, maintaining a neutral demeanor even when you're screaming internally. The gap between how you appear and how you feel grows wider over time until you're basically performing yourself, presenting a functional exterior, while the interior experiences entirely different reactions. The taste of the water from the communal well is distinctly unpleasant, carrying mineral notes and probably biological contributions you'd rather not identify. It's metallic and slightly slimy, coating your mouth with a film that lingers after swallowing. But it's the only water available, so you drink it and cook with it and wash with it despite the taste. You become accustomed to it the way you've become accustomed to everything else unpleasant, your expectations and standards gradually lowering to match your circumstances. The water is wet, and that's the primary requirement. Everything else is just details you can't afford to be particular about. The festival days when other people are celebrating create islands of increased isolation for you. The town gathers for communal joy, and you're specifically excluded, making your aloneness more acute by contrast. You can hear the music and laughter from your dwelling, reminders of social bonds and shared happiness that you don't get to participate in. These days are somehow worse than regular days because they highlight the difference between your life and normal human existence. You try to occupy yourself with tasks or maintenance work, anything to distract from the sounds of festivity happening without you, but it's impossible to fully ignore the evidence of what you're missing. The negotiations around payment sometimes devolve into arguments where you're in the weakest possible position. If someone decides to dispute the amount owed or delay payment, your options are limited. You can't refuse future work because you need the income. You can't complain too loudly because that might damage the relationship with the authorities who employ you. So you accept less than agreed or wait longer than promised, swallowing your frustration because making waves could leave you completely unemployed. The power dynamic is entirely one-sided, and everyone involved knows it, which makes the occasional exploitation almost inevitable. You're being taken advantage of, and the unfairness burns, but there's nothing practical you can do about it. The temperature inside your dwelling barely differs from outside, except you're protected from wind and rain. In summer, it's hot and stuffy, trapping warmth without providing cooling. In winter, it's cold and damp, offering minimal shelter from the freezing temperatures. The fire helps when you can afford to keep it going, but fuel is expensive, and you spend a lot of time cold simply because heating your space adequately isn't financially feasible. You sleep in your clothes, wrapped in your blanket, still shivering through the night and waking with stiff joints that take time to loosen. The chronic cold seems to settle into your bones, making you feel like you'll never be truly warm again, even when summer eventually returns. The lack of anyone checking on your well-being means you could be seriously injured or ill, and nobody would know or care until you failed to show up for a scheduled job. There's no friend dropping by to see how you're doing, no neighbour who'd notice your absence and investigate. You're completely alone in a way that's potentially dangerous, because if something happened to you, the discovery would be delayed until your absence became inconvenient for someone else. This knowledge adds a layer of caution to everything you do, knowing that a serious accident could leave you helpless with no one to help. You're more careful on the ladder, more attentive when handling your equipment, because you're your only safety net, and it's threadbare at best. The grain you buy for making porridge is often older and lower quality than what's sold to more respectable customers. It has a stale smell and sometimes includes bits that aren't actually grain, small stones or husks or mouse droppings that you have to pick out before cooking. The resulting porridge is gritty and flavourless, requiring extended chewing to break down the tougher bits. It fills your stomach without providing satisfaction, and you eat it mechanically while thinking about nothing in particular. Food has become fuel in the most literal sense, something you consume because your body requires it, but which brings no pleasure or comfort. The act of eating is just another task to complete, like hauling water or checking your equipment. The superstitions that common people hold about executioners place you in a category with witches and other supposedly dangerous figures. You're thought to have connections to dark forces, to bring bad luck, to carry contamination that can spread through contact or proximity. None of this is true, but truth doesn't matter when people need explanations for misfortune and you're a convenient scapegoat. If crops fail or illness spreads, some portion of the population will suspect your involvement somehow, as if you're personally responsible for all bad things that happen. This magical thinking would be funny if it didn't have real consequences for how you're treated and how isolated you become. The hours of darkness are long when you have no light source and no activities to occupy yourself. You lie in bed, not sleeping, but not really awake either, existing in a kind of liminal state where time passes slowly and thoughts drift without direction. Occasionally, you sleep in fragments, 30 minutes here and an hour there, never achieving deep rest. More often, you're conscious of the discomfort of your bedding, the cold, the sounds of the night, and your own circular thoughts. Waiting for dawn becomes the main activity, anticipating the moment when light returns, and you can at least see your surroundings clearly, even if nothing else about your situation improves. The stiffness in your joints when you wake up requires several minutes of careful movement before you can function normally. Your knees crack when you stand, your shoulders resist lifting your arms, and your neck protests turning your head. You move through a series of gentle motions that gradually restore mobility, looking like someone decades older than your actual age. This morning routine of coaxing your body back into working order gets longer as years pass, requiring more time and effort to achieve less complete results. The damage accumulates faster than your body can repair it, especially given your inadequate nutrition and rest, creating a downward trajectory that you're powerless to reverse. The officials who schedule your work treat you with the kind of courtesy they'd extend to a moderately unpleasant tool, necessary but not valued. Their tone is always slightly dismissive, their eye contact minimal, their instructions delivered quickly so the interaction can end. You're given information on a need-to-know basis without context or explanation, expected to simply comply without questions or discussion. This transactional relationship reminds you constantly that you're not really a person to them, just a function that needs performing. The lack of basic respect or acknowledgement of your humanity wears on you in ways that are hard to articulate, creating a sense of worthlessness that permeates your self-image. The storage area for your equipment has developed its own ecosystem of spiders and beetles that you've given up trying to eliminate. They're not bothering you and you're not bothering them, coexisting in mutual tolerance. The webs collect in corners, thick with dust and the dried husks of caught insects. The beetles scuttle away when you move things, disappearing into cracks before you get a good look at them. This shared space feels appropriate somehow, you and the insects both occupying the margins, making do in conditions that more respectable creatures would reject. You've become the kind of person who lives companionably with vermin, because you have more in common with them than with the regular townspeople. The sensation of wearing clothes that never quite dry completely is peculiarly miserable. The fabric clings in uncomfortable ways, cold against your skin and slightly clammy. You can smell the mildew developing in the folds, a musty odor that adds to your general unpleasant aroma. The dampness conducts cold efficiently, making you feel chilled even when the temperature isn't particularly low. You've given up hoping for fully dry clothing and just accepted that everything you own exists in various states of dampness. The best you achieve is less wet than yesterday, which counts as victory given your limited resources for laundry and drying. The judgment you see in people's faces when they look at you has stopped hurting as much as it used to, which is its own kind of sad victory. You've developed a protective numbness that shields you from the constant rejection, allowing their disgust and fear to bounce off without penetrating too deeply. This emotional armor is necessary for survival, but it also cuts you off from any positive interactions that might occasionally occur. You're defended against pain by being defended against feeling anything much at all, which makes you safer, but also more isolated. The person you were before this job, who could be hurt by others' opinions, has been replaced by someone harder and colder and less fully human. The various rashes and skin irritations that plague you are probably related to the combination of poor hygiene, inadequate washing, and constant contact with rough fabrics. Your armpits itch persistently, you have red patches on your torso that flake when scratched, and there's a spot on your lower leg that's developed a texture like tree bark. Without access to proper medical care or even basic skin treatments, you just endure these discomforts as part of the general constellation of physical problems you deal with daily. They're annoying rather than serious, but they contribute to the overall sense that your body is slowly falling apart, and there's nothing you can do to maintain it properly. The mathematics of survival occupy more of your thinking than they probably should. You're constantly calculating what you can afford, how long your food will last, whether you can postpone this expense or that purchase. Everything becomes a matter of trade-offs and priorities, deciding which necessity is more urgent and what you can do without a bit longer. This mental accounting never stops, running as background processing during all your waking hours. You can't make a simple decision without considering the financial implications and how it fits into your precarious budget. The cognitive load of this constant calculation is exhausting, using mental energy that you'd rather apply to literally anything else. The memories of your life before becoming an executioner are fading into vague impressions rather than clear recollections. You can barely remember feeling differently, being someone who fit into normal society, having possibilities beyond this grim existence. The past becomes less real with each passing month, like a story you heard about someone else rather than your own actual history. This loss of connection to your former self is probably protective, making it easier to accept your current circumstances by forgetting there was ever an alternative. But it's also deeply unsettling, realizing you're losing the thread of your own narrative, becoming unmoored from any identity except executioner. The wind that blows through town carries smells that vary by season and weather, none of them pleasant. In warm weather, it brings the reek of the tannery, the midden heaps, and unwashed humanity living in close quarters. In cold weather, it's sharper but no cleaner, carrying smoke from countless fires and the particular dankness of wet stone and timber. You've stopped noticing most of the time because your nose has adapted, filtering out the worst of it as background that doesn't require attention. But occasionally you catch a whiff of something particularly foul and remember that you're living in conditions that would horrify anyone with better options. The boredom of your non-working hours is profound and difficult to combat, with no resources for entertainment or distraction. You can only maintain your equipment so many times, only pace your dwelling so many hours, only sit and stare at nothing for so long before the tedium becomes physically painful. Time stretches out interminably when you have nothing to fill it with and no one to share it with. You exist in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for the next job, not because you want to work, but because work at least provides structure and purpose. The emptiness of your free time might actually be worse than the stress of working, though in different ways. The protocol when you encounter someone you recognize from previous work, perhaps someone whose relative you dealt with, is awkward in the extreme. Do you acknowledge them? Pretend you don't remember? They certainly remember you and what you did, and the encounter drips with unstated tension. Usually both parties pretend the other doesn't exist, looking through each other as if you're ghosts, and continuing on your separate ways as quickly as possible. These moments of forced invisibility are surreal, pretending that significant shared history never happened, because actually acknowledging it would be too uncomfortable for everyone involved. You become practiced at this social fiction, erasing yourself on demand whenever the situation requires it. The sound of your own footsteps on the wooden platform has become eerily familiar, recognizable to you in a way that's both professional and disturbing. You know which boards creak, which ones sound hollow, which sections feel more solid underfoot. This intimate knowledge of your workspace is the kind of detail that develops over time through repetition, and it represents expertise in something you'd rather not be expert in. Your feet find the reliable spots automatically now, muscle memory guiding you across the surface without conscious thought. It's efficient, but also means you've done this enough times that your body has internalized the geography of the space where you perform the town's grim necessities. The bucket of water you keep for washing your hands and face after work never feels adequate to the task. You scrub vigorously, working the harsh soap into your skin until it's red and irritated, but you still feel contaminated somehow. The water turns murky quickly, developing a greyish colour and bits of debris floating in it, and you're never quite sure if you're actually getting cleaner or just redistributing the grime. Eventually, you give up and dump the bucket, knowing you've done what you can and that perfection isn't achievable anyway. Your hands still don't feel right for hours afterward, a phantom sensation of wrongness that no amount of washing addresses, because the problem isn't really physical. The rats that live in the walls of your dwelling have grown bold enough to emerge while you're still awake, scurrying along the baseboards on their mysterious rodent errands. You watch them sometimes, too tired to care anymore, observing their purposeful movements and thinking how much simpler their lives must be. They need food and shelter, and they're satisfied. No complex social dynamics or reputation concerns. You've reached a point where you're envious of rats, which is perhaps the clearest sign of how far your standards and expectations have fallen. One particularly large specimen has claimed territory near your food storage, and you've accepted this situation because trying to fight it seems pointless when new rats will just replace any you manage to eliminate. The morning light, when it finally comes, feels harsh rather than welcoming, revealing all the grime and damage your dwelling has accumulated. In darkness, you can pretend things aren't as bad as they are, but daylight is unforgiving in its clarity. You see every stain, every hole, every sign of neglect and poverty that characterizes your living space. Starting the day with this visual reminder of your circumstances doesn't exactly inspire optimism or energy. You drag yourself upright and begin the process of becoming functional, knowing that the day ahead will be much like yesterday and the day before, an endless repetition of survival without progress or improvement. The technique you've developed for blocking out unwanted thoughts would be impressive if it weren't a trauma response. You can shut down entire trains of thought before they fully form, deflecting your mind away from topics that lead to despair or anxiety. This mental discipline is useful for functioning under stress, but also means you're constantly suppressing and avoiding rather than actually processing anything. The blocked thoughts don't disappear, they accumulate somewhere in your psyche, creating pressure that occasionally erupts in nightmares or sudden attacks of emotion that catch you off guard. You're managing symptoms without addressing causes, because there's no opportunity or support for genuine healing. The marks on your hands from rope friction are permanent now, lines of thickened skin where the fiber has worn grooves through repeated contact. Your palms have developed a map of your profession, readable to anyone who knows what to look for. These marks make you identifiable even when you're not working, branding you physically the way your profession brands you socially. You're self-conscious about your hands in a way you never were before, keeping them hidden when possible, or curling your fingers to obscure the worst of the damage. Not that it matters much since everyone knows what you do anyway, but the visible evidence feels like an additional violation of your ability to be seen as anything other than your job. The conversations you overhear while moving through town give you strange insight into daily dramas and concerns that don't involve you at all. People discuss crop yields, family disputes, business arrangements, and romantic entanglements while you drift past unnoticed like a ghost. You're privy to all this mundane human experience while being excluded from participating in any of it. Sometimes you know more about someone's personal life than their friends do, simply because you're so thoroughly dismissed that people don't bother moderating their conversations in your presence. This invisible observer status is lonely, but occasionally informative, giving you a window into the normal world you no longer belong to. The repairs you've made to your clothing over time have transformed your garments into patchwork creations, where the original fabric is barely visible. You've stitched pieces from other worn-out items over holes, creating layers that are bulky and uncomfortable, but at least provide coverage. The thread you use doesn't match, creating visible seams in contrasting colors that map the history of each garment's deterioration and repair. You're wearing your poverty visibly, advertising your inability to afford proper clothing with every mismatched patch and crude stitch. The overall effect is shabby in a way that makes you want to be invisible, though your profession already accomplishes that in most practical senses. The concept of planning for the future beyond immediate survival seems absurd when you can barely manage the present. You don't think about next year or 5 years from now, because extrapolating your current circumstances forward is too depressing. Instead, you focus on the next day, maybe the next week if you're feeling ambitious, keeping your horizons narrow enough that hope and despair are both irrelevant. This short-term thinking is practical for maintaining sanity, but also means you're not taking any steps to improve your situation because you've stopped believing improvement is possible. You're treading water indefinitely, putting effort into not drowning rather than into swimming toward any particular destination. The taste of metal that you sometimes notice in your mouth might be related to poor dental health, general malnutrition, or just the stress that causes you to clench your jaw constantly. It's unpleasant, but faint, easy to ignore among all the other minor physical discomforts you deal with regularly. You've stopped trying to diagnose every ache and pain because the answer is always the same. You're not getting adequate food or rest or medical care, and all your systems are suffering accordingly. The body is remarkably resilient, but yours is being tested continuously, running on minimal resources and expected to perform physically demanding work anyway. Something's gonna break eventually. It's just a question of what and when. The birds that nest in the eaves of your dwelling create noise and mess, but you've decided to tolerate them because at least they're alive and doing well. Their droppings add to the general squalor, but their singing in the morning provides something almost pleasant, a reminder that life continues and finds opportunities even in unpromising locations. You identify with them perhaps too strongly, seeing yourself in these creatures making homes in marginal spaces, surviving where more selective birds wouldn't bother. They're not beautiful songbirds, just common brown things that no one pays attention to, which makes them perfect neighbours for someone like you. The sensation of rain hitting your face during outdoor work is oddly grounding, one of the few times you feel physically connected to something larger than your immediate misery. The water is cold and clean, washing away sweat and providing momentary refreshment, even as it makes your working conditions more difficult. You tip your head back sometimes and let the rain fall directly onto your closed eyelids, feeling the gentle impact and pretending for a moment that you're somewhere else doing something else. These brief escapes into physical sensation are among your only respites from the grinding reality of your existence, small moments where you're just a body experiencing weather rather than an executioner experiencing social rejection. The wooden spoon you use for eating and cooking has been worn smooth by years of use, the handle shaped to your grip and the bowl edge slightly irregular from scraping against your pot. It's possibly the only object you own that you have any affection for, this simple tool that served you reliably without judgment or complication. When you hold it, your fingers find the familiar grooves automatically, a small comfort in the consistent shape and weight. It's ridiculous to have emotional attachment to a spoon, but when everything else in your life is difficult and unstable, even small constants become meaningful. You've thought about what you'd save if your dwelling burned, and the spoon makes the list despite being easily replaceable because it's yours in a way that few things are. The pattern of your breathing changes when you're anxious, becoming shallow and rapid in ways you only notice when you're already deep into panic. Your chest feels tight and you can't seem to get enough air despite breathing faster, creating a cycle that makes the anxiety worse. You've learned to recognize this pattern, and sometimes you can interrupt it by forcing yourself to take slow, deliberate breaths, though this requires focus and calm that aren't always available. The physical symptoms of stress are exhausting on top of the mental burden, your body staging its own rebellion against the constant pressure you're operating under. You finish work days feeling wrung out and shaky, depleted in ways that simple rest never fully addresses. The hierarchy of smells in your dwelling has stabilized into distinct layers that you've mapped unconsciously. There's the surface smell of whatever you cooked most recently, underlaid by the persistent mildew of damp wood and fabric, with base notes of unwashed human and rodent occupation. Occasionally a new smell intrudes, something rotting that you'll need to locate and remove, or the tang of smoke when the wind blows wrong and fills the space with fumes. You navigate this olfactory landscape automatically, registering changes that might indicate problems, but mostly accepting the overall stench as the price of having shelter at all. Your nose has adapted remarkably, filtering out the worst of it so you can function without constant disgust. The town crier who announces news and events carefully avoids mentioning you directly, even when announcing executions, referring to the event and the sentence without naming the person who'll carry it out. This linguistic gymnastics creates odd phrasing, where you're implied but never stated, a grammatical ghost haunting the official announcements. You listen to these declarations when you happen to be in earshot, learning your schedule secondhand through public announcement, rather than direct notification. The avoidance is so consistent it's almost funny, everyone dancing around your existence while depending on your function, acknowledging the role while erasing the person who fills it. The state of your teeth concerns you when you let yourself think about it, which you try not to do often. Several molars hurt when you chew. You've lost one already, and another feels loose in a way that suggests it won't stay much longer. Your gums are sore and occasionally swell up for no apparent reason, creating painful lumps that gradually subside. The medieval diet and complete lack of dental care mean your mouth is slowly falling apart, and there's nothing you can do except endure the progressive deterioration. You've adjusted your eating to favor softer foods and chewing on the less damaged side, working around the problems because solving them isn't an option. Eventually you'll lose enough teeth that eating becomes seriously difficult, but that's a future problem for future you to handle. The muscle memory that guides your work is both asset and burden, allowing you to function even when your conscious mind is struggling, but also meaning your body knows how to do things you wish you didn't know. Your hands move through familiar patterns without deliberate control, efficient and practiced in ways that should probably bother you more than they do. You've compartmentalized the physical actions from their meaning, treating them as mechanical tasks, rather than engaging with the reality of what you're doing. This dissociation is protective, but also means you're partially checked out of your own life, operating on autopilot, while some essential part of yourself hides away from full awareness. The negotiations with your own conscience happen less frequently than they used to, not because you've resolved the moral questions, but because you've exhausted the arguments. You need to survive, you tell yourself, and this is the only way available to you. And eventually that justification becomes rote enough that you stop actively thinking through it. The ethical dimensions of your work haven't changed, but your engagement with them has, shutting down inquiry in favor of acceptance. This moral numbness matches the emotional numbness you've developed, both serving to protect you from the full weight of your circumstances by preventing you from feeling or thinking too deeply about any of it. The corners of your dwelling collect dust and debris faster than you can address them, creating drifts of dirt that gradually expand until they're small dunes of grime. You sweep occasionally, but the accumulation is constant, fed by the earthen floor and the gaps in walls and roof that let in dust from outside. Fighting it feels futile, so mostly you don't, accepting that clean corners are a luxury for people with better housing and more time. The dirt becomes part of the landscape, permanent features you navigate around rather than problems requiring solution. Your standards for cleanliness have adjusted to match your capabilities, lowering steadily until you're only bothered by truly extreme filth rather than the everyday grime that characterizes your living space. The sound of the church bells marking hours and services reaches your dwelling faintly, reminding you of the passage of time and the religious community you're mostly excluded from. You hear the calls to prayer, the celebration of festivals, the tolling for various occasions, and each sound reinforces your outsider status. The bells ring for everyone, but somehow not for you, including you technically in their call, but excluding you practically from the gatherings they announce. You've stopped feeling invited by the bells and started hearing them as simple time markers, stripped of their spiritual or communal meaning, and reduced to functional notifications of the hour. The comparison between your daily experience and what you imagine normal people's lives are like has become less painful through sheer repetition. You've accepted that you're different, that your life follows different rules and includes different hardships, and the unfairness of it no longer generates the sharp resentment it once did. This acceptance isn't peace or contentment, just exhaustion from fighting against immovable realities. You've surrendered to your circumstances in ways both practical and psychological, making the best of an undeniably bad situation, because the alternative is being crushed by bitterness and despair. Your current state is sustainable if joyless, and sustainability is the best outcome you can reasonably expect given the hand you've been dealt. The awareness of your own smell has mostly disappeared through constant exposure, but occasionally you catch a whiff of yourself and realize just how pungent you've become. It's a complex odor involving unwashed body, old clothes, wood smoke, damp dwelling, and the particular mustiness of your profession all combined into something uniquely unpleasant. You understand immediately why people maintain distance, your nose finally registering what you've been inflicting on everyone else constantly. The recognition is brief before your olfactory adaptation kicks back in, but those moments of clarity are humbling reminders of how far outside normal standards of hygiene you've drifted. There's no fixing it with your limited resources, so you just return to ignorance and hope others will tolerate it, because they need your services. The muscles in your forearms have developed noticeably from the repetitive work, creating definition that would look impressive if anyone saw them in a context other than your profession. Your grip strength has increased substantially. You can hold and manipulate heavy objects with ease that would challenge someone less conditioned. This physical capability is practical but also feels wasted. Strength developed for purposes you're not proud of and can't translate into other work. Your body has adapted to meet the demands placed on it, becoming more capable in specific ways that only highlight how trapped you are in this particular role. The strength is real, but useless for anything beyond continuing to do what you're already doing. The frost patterns on the inside of your walls during deep winter are actually quite beautiful when you're not focused on how they represent your dwelling's complete failure to retain heat. Delicate ice crystals form in elaborate designs, nature creating art in the gaps between you and freezing to death. You watch them sometimes by dim light, appreciating the aesthetic while simultaneously shivering under your inadequate blanket. The contrast between the beauty and the discomfort is sharp, a reminder that difficult circumstances can still contain moments of unexpected grace, even if those moments don't make the circumstances any less difficult. The frost melts during the day and reforms at night, a cycle that mirrors your own pattern of marginal survival, followed by renewed struggle. The meetings with the town clerk to confirm details and receive assignments are mercifully brief but intensely uncomfortable while they last. You stand in his workspace surrounded by records and official documents, feeling out of place and too large for the cramped space. He speaks quickly, impatient to finish the interaction, and you nod along while trying to remember all the information being delivered rapidly. There's no written confirmation for you to reference later, just verbal instructions that you're expected to retain and follow precisely. The clerk never offers you a seat or any basic courtesy, treating the entire exchange as an unfortunate necessity to be completed as efficiently as possible. You leave feeling vaguely anxious about whether you caught all the details and knowing there's no one you can ask for clarification. The pattern of your daily movement has worn paths in the dirt floor of your dwelling, visible tracks showing where you walk most frequently between door and hearth, hearth and sleeping area, and storage. These paths are slightly lower than the surrounding floor, compressed by countless footsteps into harder packed routes that map your limited routines. You follow these paths automatically, your feet finding the familiar routes without conscious guidance, walking the same circuits day after day. The tracks are physical evidence of how constrained and repetitive your life has become, literal ruts that you're moving through without variation or escape. New paths don't form because you don't do new things. You just repeat the same minimal motions required for survival. The birds you sometimes watch from your doorway seem to have more freedom and better prospects than you do, which is a depressing realization about your life circumstances. They fly where they want, find food where they can, and aren't judged by other birds for their survival strategies. You're envious of their mobility and their simple needs, the way their lives seem uncomplicated by social structures or reputation concerns. Obviously, you're projecting human concepts onto animals that have their own challenges, but in your darker moments, the comparison is hard to avoid. You're trapped by invisible constraints that are somehow more effective than the bird's very visible inability to survive winter without food. Your cage made of social stigma rather than bars, but no less confining. The sensation of genuine warmth has become so rare that when you experience it, perhaps standing near someone's outdoor fire or in a brief shaft of sunlight, you want to hoard the feeling somehow. You stand still and let the heat soak in, trying to memorize the sensation of not being cold for these few precious moments. Your body responds gratefully, muscles loosening and shivers subsiding, before the warmth inevitably ends and you return to your default state of mild hypothermia. These brief respites make the return to cold worse in some ways, reminding you of what you're missing constantly, but you can't bring yourself to avoid them. The momentary comfort is worth the sharper contrast that follows, small deposits in a nearly empty account of physical pleasure. The stories you tell yourself to make sense of your life have evolved over time, from narratives about temporary difficulty to acceptance of permanent circumstance. You no longer frame this as a phase you're passing through or a challenge you'll overcome. This is just what your life is now, indefinitely, and the sooner you accept that fully, the less energy you waste on false hope. The shift from temporary to permanent mindset is significant, changing how you approach each day and what you allow yourself to want or expect. You've stopped planning for after because there is no after, just more of the same until physical failure eventually ends the repetition. It's bleak, but also clarifying, removing the cognitive dissonance of pretending things might change when they demonstrably won't. The creaking of the platform under your weight has become a familiar sound that you barely notice anymore, but you remember when it used to unnerve you and make you hyper-aware of the structure's integrity. Now, it's just background noise, the wooden settling and shifting that happens with any structure, no more alarming than bird song or wind. Your habituation to things that should probably still concern you is complete. You've normalized aspects of your work and life that would horrify someone encountering them fresh. This normalization is protective, but also means you've lost perspective on just how abnormal your circumstances are, accepting as routine what should be recognized as deeply wrong. You can't afford perspective, though. It would make continuing impossible, so you maintain your narrow focus and avoid thinking too broadly about what your life has become. The negotiations you witness secondhand, hearing about disputes and agreements through the gossip network, remind you that normal people have conflicts about property and business and family matters that seem trivial from your perspective. They argue about boundary lines and inherited items, and whose responsibility it is to maintain shared wells, concerns that belong to a world of social connection and ownership you're excluded from. Your problems are more fundamental, related to survival and isolation, and the daily grind of getting by with absolutely nothing extra. The gap between your concerns and theirs is wide enough that you can barely remember what it felt like to care about the things they fight over. You exist in a different reality, occupying the same physical space but living in completely separate experiential universes. The certainty that you'll never own anything of real value has settled into your bones as completely as the chronic cold. You'll never have fine clothes or quality tools or furniture worth mentioning, or any of the markers of modest prosperity that even poor people sometimes achieve. Your possessions will always be the bare minimum, worn out and barely functional, replaced only when they literally fall apart beyond any possibility of repair. This permanent poverty isn't just about current circumstances, but about future prospects, knowing that no amount of work or time will change your fundamental position at the bottom of society. You can't save your way to better things because your income is too irregular and too small, leaving you perpetually one problem away from complete destitution. The sound of normal families going about their evening routines filters through the walls and across the gaps between dwellings, giving you unwanted glimpses into domestic life you'll never experience. You hear conversations between spouses, the settling of households for night, occasional laughter that speaks to contentment and connection. These sounds highlight your isolation more effectively than silence would, demonstrating exactly what you're missing while you sit alone in your cold dwelling with nothing but your own thoughts for company. You've tried to block out these reminders, but the walls are too thin and sound carries too well, forcing you to be aware of the normal lives happening all around you, while yours continues on its separate, diminished track. The acceptance that you'll probably die alone, possibly not discovered for days or weeks after the fact, is morbid but realistic given your circumstances. No one checks on you. No one would miss you personally, rather than just noticing your professional absence, and your dwelling is isolated enough that your body could rest undiscovered until the smell or the missed appointments finally prompted investigation. You've made a kind of peace with this likely end, recognizing that you can't control it, and worrying about it changes nothing. It's just another aspect of your life that would be tragic if you let yourself dwell on it. So you file it away with all the other unpleasant realities you've learned to live with through determined not thinking. The comparison of your life to a prison sentence occasionally occurs to you, except prisoners might actually have better living conditions and more social interaction than you do. They're at least kept alive adequately and given work that's acknowledged as punishment rather than employment. Your sentence has no end date and no possibility of pardon, just indefinite continuation until death finally commutes it to something terminal. The crime you're serving time for is being desperate enough or unfortunate enough to end up in this profession, and the punishment is lifetime exclusion from normal human society. There's no rehabilitation or redemption available, You'll always be the executioner regardless of how long you serve or how well you perform the duties. The moments when you realize you've been sitting motionless for extended periods, staring at nothing while time passes unmarked, are disorienting and concerning. You lose chunks of hours to this empty state where you're not quite sleeping but not actively thinking either, just existing in a kind of suspended animation. These episodes leave you feeling more tired rather than rested. Time vanished without providing recovery or benefit. You should probably be worried about what these dissociative spells mean for your mental health, but you lack the framework or resources to address psychological problems even if you fully acknowledge them. Instead, you just shake yourself out of it when you notice and try to occupy your mind with something, anything, to prevent falling back into that empty state. The calculation of whether your life has value or meaning comes up regularly during your lowest moments, and the honest answer is increasingly difficult to frame positively. You serve a function that society requires, but you as an individual are entirely replaceable and thoroughly unwanted. Your existence makes no one happy, improves nothing, contributes only to the machinery of punishment that operates with or without your specific participation. The philosophical question of whether a life lived in isolation and misery is worth living bumps against your stubborn insistence on continuing, creating tension between rational assessment and animal persistence. You don't have a good answer, just the inertia of continuing, because stopping would require active effort you can't quite muster. The tools that filled your dwelling and represented your profession have become the only constants in a life otherwise devoid of stability or permanence. They're more reliable than people, more consistent than income, more present than any human relationship. You know their weight and balance intimately, understand their maintenance requirements completely, and trust them to function when needed in ways you can't trust anything else in your life. This relationship with objects, rather than people, is probably unhealthy, but it's what you have, the only consistent presence in your daily existence. They define you more completely than any personal characteristics, marking you as executioner more permanently than any title or official designation could. The recognition that you've become the person you most pitied when you first took this position is simultaneously humbling and horrifying. You remember thinking you'd be different, that you'd maintain your humanity and dignity somehow, despite the profession's demands. But time and circumstance have worn away those distinctions. You've become exactly what the job requires, hardened and isolated, and increasingly disconnected from the person you once were. The transformation happened gradually enough that you didn't notice it happening, tiny compromises and adaptations accumulating until you'd changed fundamentally. Looking back is painful because you can see the trajectory clearly now, the inevitable progression from hopeful determination to resigned survival to something approaching living death. The absence of anyone who'd mourn your passing is perhaps the starkest measure of how completely you've been excluded from human community. You'll leave no gap in anyone's life, create no absence that people feel or remember, generate no stories that get told after you're gone. You'll be replaced professionally within days and forgotten personally almost as quickly, a brief notation in records that no one will ever bother reading. This anonymity in death matches your invisibility in life, the final confirmation that you existed outside the networks of care and connection that make individuals matter to others. It should bother you more than it does, but you've been preparing for this reality through years of isolation that have already accomplished most of the work of erasure. The question of what you'd do differently if you could start over is pointless but unavoidable. cycling through your mind during the empty hours? The obvious answer is avoid this profession entirely, make different choices that led to different outcomes. But the reality is, your options were always limited, and the path to your current position wasn't really paved with meaningful choices. You were pushed here by circumstances and necessity, more than pulled by preference, and alternate histories where you became something else required different starting conditions you didn't have. So the question is ultimately futile, changing nothing and providing no useful insight. Just another way for your mind to torment you with visions of impossible alternatives.